Welcome to the Saturday Cadence podcast. I'm Blake Biscardi, and remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. The college football playoff bracket is officially set. We're going to break that all down for you. We're going to talk about the flaws. We're going to talk about the debates that they had on the outside, how SMU gets in instead of Alabama, Oregon, the number one overall seed. Much to discuss, including Ohio State hosting an SEC team in mid-December. My name is Blake Biscardi, and welcome into Saturday Cadence. We've got a great show for you today, reacting to the College Football Playoff Selection Committee's official bracket, the 12-team field. This is the first edition of it. It is out. It is official. These games are set in stone. So let's talk about it here. I'm going to tell you each seed first, and then we will talk about the matchups that we have, some of the contenders' paths, and just our instant reaction to what's going on here. Number one overall seed. No surprise here. We've got the Oregon Ducks. They finished 13-0, winning the Big Ten championship game. They had Penn State handled pretty much for the entire time. Penn State did have a chance to tie the game through an interception late inside of 2 minutes, and that was the end of it. Dan Lanning and the Ducks come into the Big Ten in year one, and they win the conference in Indianapolis, securing the number one overall seed, and their first game in the playoff will be a quarterfinal in the Rose Bowl. That'll be on New Year's Day at 5 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock local time there on the West Coast. 2 seed Georgia. They upset Texas. They beat them for the second time this season, even without Carson Beck in the second half. He had that injury to his arm. So Georgia, in spite of that, wins the SEC. Georgia had a gauntlet of a schedule. I know we were talking about them maybe not being deserving with 3 losses. I thought that they should be in. They should be in comfortably. I think they're one of the best rosters in college football. You know, record's not always indicative of how good or bad that your team is, as we'll get to later in the show with potentially SMU, Miami, Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, all those teams. But Georgia in at number 2. Their first game will be the quarterfinal in the All-State Sugar Bowl. That'll be also New Year's Day at 8:45. Boise State, the 3 seed, Arizona State, the 4 seed. This is where I think we're going to see some heads starting to spin here. Neither one of these teams are ranked inside the top 8. The other thing is they're taking a bye away from another Big Ten team, another SEC team, and potentially Notre Dame, these 2 teams. So I think you're going to see some resistance from the Big Ten, the SEC folks, seeing that in here. We know there's some flaws in this bracket, but as it stands right now, Boise State, the 3 seed, will open up in the Fiesta Bowl on New Year's Eve at 7:30, and Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. They were the lowest of the top 4 seeds. They are the 4th, so they do not get the closest proximity game to them. They got the last of the draw there with how the bowl games rotate. So it will be the Peach Bowl in Atlanta. That will be New Year's Day at 1 o'clock here on the East Coast. Now, we'll look at the rest of this bracket, and we were debating who the 5 seed would be. Would it be Notre Dame? Would it be Texas? Penn State potentially. Couldn't be Ohio State because Lord Manuel said on the show that the teams off would not be able to jump each other. They were set in stone in the order that they were. So Texas ended up losing the SEC championship game. They are now the 5 seed. They will be hosting Clemson in the first round. That game will be at 4 o'clock on Saturday, December 21st in Austin. That game televised on TNT. Then you look at the 6 seed, and this is arguably the most favorable draw for the entire field of any of the teams. This is the most favorable draw, and it's Penn State. Now, Penn State had played 2 big games all year, one to Ohio State, lost it at home, not have an offensive touchdown, and then they put up 518 yards. So the antithesis of the performance they had against Ohio State, they had against Oregon, it was good enough to win the game, but they had costly turnovers, questionable decision-making. Penn State ends up losing that game, but they got rewarded the most. They are the 6 seed hosting SMU. That game will be in State College, and I'm sure it will just be balmy in the middle of December up in the mountains in State College, probably 15, 20 degrees, no kidding. That game will be the noon slot on Saturday, December 21st, also on TNT. 7 is Notre Dame, in-state matchup here. The Irish hosting the Hoosiers of Indiana. That game is the nightcap on Friday night, the standalone game on Friday, December 20th, 8 o'clock from South Bend. And then this is the big one here, the 8-9 game. This is going to be the highest-rated game of the first round. It is Ohio State at home, the 8 seed hosting SEC team, Tennessee, the 9 seed, both teams sitting at 10-2, not playing their conference championship games. The nightcap on Saturday, December 21st, 8 o'clock, live from Columbus. The Horseshoe going to be rocking and electric. Ohio State fans, you had to play 6 straight noon games to end the season. You get rewarded or penalized, however you want to look at it, with a home playoff game at night in mid-December against a quote-unquote Southern team. No, Tennessee's not a stranger to cool weather, but it's probably going to be much colder in Columbus than it will in Knoxville or elsewhere in the South for this one. So massive game here. Now, this is where I want to talk about what's happening with these matchups here. And we're going to start with this Ohio State and Tennessee game because it is the marquee matchup of the first round here. Ohio State hosting Tennessee. The winner of this game will advance to play in the Rose Bowl against Oregon, the number 1 overall seed. And this is where I said there's going to be a flaw here because Penn State lost the game. They got a more favorable draw than Oregon did for winning the Big Ten championship game because they would await the winner of Ohio State and Tennessee. And then the winner of that game is potentially going to play Texas in a semifinal. I mean, that's a tough path for Ohio State, Tennessee, whoever wins to get to the semifinal, and even Oregon having to beat the winner of Ohio State and Tennessee and then going ahead to play Texas just to advance the national championship. That's pretty difficult there. I think this is a lopsided and unbalanced bracket, especially on that side of the Oregon side of the bracket here, where you'll have Oregon, Ohio State, Tennessee, and Texas. I mean, that is absolutely loaded. And no disrespect to Arizona State or Clemson. I just don't think those two teams personally are on the caliber of those other teams. And you have 3 of your 4 best odds to win the national championship on the same side of the bracket. So that means only one of those teams can advance to the national championship from that cluster. So very interesting here. But if you're Ohio State, you have a really, really bitter taste in your mouth from losing to Michigan at home. Terrible performance, 13-10. The offense just sputtered the entire day. The defense played pretty well. Special teams not good. Ryan Day has been on the hot seat. He's been dragged through the mud. And you know what? In his press conference, he took ownership for it. He said it was the coaching staff's fault. That was my takeaway, too, from the game. Being there, the players were juiced. They looked ready to go, just weren't put in advantageous situations. This is all time for redemption now. You can't undo that game against Michigan. You can't get that taste out of your mouth until next year. But what you can do is you can beat an SEC team in Tennessee, one that's well-respected. Josh Heupel, Nico Amalevea, Dylan Sampson, James Pierce, all these players that Tennessee has. This is going to be a star-studded game. And if you're Ryan Day in Ohio State, this is your chance to begin the chance of redemption and righting the ship and turning the page and taking that next step. This is a big game. This is the biggest game right here. Then you know what the next game is? It's bigger than that. But Ryan Day and Ohio State, this coaching staff, the players, the senior class of 2021, that is 0-3 in their goals to beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, and win the national championship. In their first 3 years, they're now 0-2 this year, did not beat Michigan, did not win the Big Ten. Well, they have a chance to get to a national championship here, and they have the most difficult road of any team. And now I'm not just saying that about Ohio State. This is also Tennessee, because the winner of this game has the most difficult path because they would have had to go through the other team to get to that title. The ultimate chance to cement your legacy as true Buckeyes and win a championship. All would be pretty much forgiven if you could do that. It's a massive opportunity for this Ohio State team, for Ryan Day, for Chip Kelly, for Will Howard, the offensive line, and Justin Fry. There is massive, massive opportunity in this matchup, and I cannot wait for it. It is going to be extremely exciting. Headlining matchup of the day here. I really want to see the matchup between the quarterbacks, Will Howard and Nico Amalevea. You can argue they're pretty similar in how they've played. Now, Will Howard's been pretty efficient throughout the entire year. He's completed 80% of his passes in 6 games. And, you know, Nico's had his bright spots too. There's also been some times where both quarterbacks had a final play where Nico ran out of bounds and Will Howard slid, and both of those plays ended the game. And they lost by 1 possession with a chance to win. They were within scoring range, and they both ran the clock out. So which quarterback handles the moment better? Which quarterback responds and plays to that level? So that battle is going to be huge. So is the line of scrimmage. And now Ohio State struggled in the line of scrimmage against Michigan. They would likely struggle against Oregon or Texas. But I think what's going to happen with Ohio State because of that, now they were fine against Indiana. I think Ohio State's going to reshuffle the offensive line. And Ryan Day has hinted at looking at what changes they can make heading into the playoff in the postseason. I don't know if that's Josh Padilla at center and you slide Donovan Jackson back over to his right position, or Austin Siereveld something's going to happen with this offensive line here where it's going to look different. I think Ohio State is they're going to play better up front. I don't know exactly how it's going to look, but I would expect that offensive line to look different for the Buckeyes. And then because they've got to contain James Pierce, similar to Abdul Carter. I mean, these two are two of the best ends in the country here. Abdul Carter got to Will Howard 3 times. There were some times that Donovan Jackson had taken one-on-one and he just got burnt. So they may need some help at times, but he is a force to be reckoned with for Tennessee. And then Dylan Sampson, that running back, is just outstanding. So there's a lot of great players in this game. The coaching battle, the offensive minds in this game between Josh Heupel and Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, this is going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you are making your plans to tune in, whatever you're doing. Make sure you're in front of the TV, you're at the game, however you want to take this in, because this game is going to be outstanding. And then that winner advancing to the Rose Bowl to get Oregon. Again, another great game there. But the next one that I want to talk about here, let's look at this Texas and Clemson game. Now, Clemson is in at the 12 seed. So before we break into this matchup here, how did Clemson get here? Now, they started 17th ranked this week. Now, you say, well, how can they be 17th and move all the way up to 12? Well, in the final playoff rankings, they finished 16th. So again, how can they be outside of 12 and get in? Well, this is why we have auto bids. That's how Boise State and Arizona State have bye weeks as the 3 and the 4 seeds here. Clemson, same thing. Auto bid, winning the ACC on a walk-off 56-yard field goal. Dominated SMU in the first quarter. They were up big in the second and third quarter. SMU started making the comeback. They tie the game with less than a minute to go, less than 30 seconds to go. And then Clemson walks it off with a freshman 56-yard field goal. Just electric scenes there after getting a big kick return, an efficient pass, and then boom, sets up the field goal, and Clemson wins. Dabo Swinney now 8-1 in ACC title games. They get a shot in the playoff against Steve Sarkisian and Texas. Quinn Ewers not having his best day against Georgia, so we're going to see. Does Quinn Ewers have a Georgia problem, or is Quinn Ewers just not taking that next step? Do they maybe turn to Arch Manning? What's going to happen for Texas? What are they going to look like? Because Clemson now has new life with Cade Klubnik. Which team shows up? That's the question for Clemson. Which team shows up? So I see this, and I really think that you're going to see a good version of Clemson. I think Klubnik will play well. I just don't think they're going to have enough against Texas. But again, the Longhorns, they can handle Clemson. They can handle Arizona State. I expect to see them in the semifinals. And then you look elsewhere, who else is going to have an easier path to semifinal? And that's Penn State. I mean, Penn State lost the Big Ten championship game, like I mentioned. They get the really easy draw here. And again, this is no disrespect to those teams, but it's just showing you the unbalanced nature of this bracket. I mean, if your top 4 teams in the country are Oregon, Georgia, Penn State, Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State, however you want to shape that out, just let those teams have the bye, have the balanced bracket, because in each of these funnels of how this bracket works, you have Clemson and Texas going with Arizona State. So that's a cluster of 3 teams. You have Tennessee, Ohio State, and Oregon. That's a power cluster. Then you have SMU, Penn State, and Boise State. I mean, it's clear, just like Texas, there's one team that's head and shoulders above talent-wise, roster-wise, coaching-wise, resources-wise, and you got a game at home. I just don't see Penn State losing one of those 2 games. I mean, upsets happen, but Texas and Penn State, very favorable draws. And for James Franklin, you're looking at this and you're like, all right, you're not big. You're not good in big games. Well, these games are big, and you're going to be favored this time. It's going to be a little bit of an inverse script for the Nittany Lions. James Franklin doesn't have an excuse to not coach well or to lose these games. This is tailor-made for Penn State. If Penn State could make this bracket themselves, if they could write and say, you know what, this is the ideal path for us to get to a semifinal or even a national championship game, what would that path look like? It would involve being the 6th seed here, playing SMU, playing Boise State, and then having to win one game against either Georgia, Notre Dame, or Indiana in the semifinals, likely Georgia, to get to a national championship game. So you just think about this. The opportunity for James Franklin. I know we talked about the opportunity for Ryan Day. James Franklin is worse in big games. And again, I really don't want to read into this too much with Day or with Franklin, because I think they're both good coaches for their respective schools. Penn State's a perfectly rated coach James Franklin's a perfectly rated coach for Penn State. So they can just walk right through here. I mean, SMU's going to give them a handful, I think, for the first half, but Penn State should just outmuscle them and out-talent them, outclass them. That's what I think happens in this game. And then again, Penn State's good at stopping the run. You got Ashton Genty, he's the best running back in the country, potential Heisman winner. Again, I just think that Penn State's going to outclass both of these two teams. And it's not to take away from Boise or SMU. They're just going to get outclassed. And that's how I see that. I think the same thing's going to happen with Indiana against Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a great football team. You'll see a competitive first half. Notre Dame will just outclass them. The defense will be smothering in that second half. And you're going to get Notre Dame and Georgia. And I think that's going to be a phenomenal matchup in the Sugar Bowl. And it's one Notre Dame can win. Carson Beck's health is going to be in question. We're not sure what the outcome is of that injury. Is he going to miss time? Will he be able to practice? How much will he be able to practice if he can? How healthy is he? So all that has plenty of time to shake out, because as we're sitting here, December 8th, Selection Sunday, December 9th, listening to the show, Georgia doesn't play for almost a full month. I mean, they don't play until New Year's Day, so he has plenty of time to heal, rest up. If there's any procedure that needs to happen, there's time for him to get right before that game. So I expect a healthy Carson Beck against the winner of Notre Dame and Indiana. But again, just looking at this bracket, it is clear that something has to be done with the formatting. And I didn't want to lead the show with Alabama because it seems like we do it all the time. And I want to get you guys to know who's in the field, what the games are, what the matchups are, what it looks like. But let's talk about Alabama. They have 3 wins against the top 25. SMU lacks a big win. That debate, SMU was the last team in, Alabama the first team out. What it comes down to, and I think this is what the committee did, they showed you inconsistency, right? They showed you the consistency here when last week they ranked the teams and they had Oregon at the top, they had Texas, they had Penn State, they had Notre Dame, they had Georgia. Those are your top 5. They had SMU at 8. They said they value the teams that get to the conference championship game. We had debated all year, how would they view the teams that lose the conference championship games? It's an extra game. In the 4-team format last year, Georgia, number 1 team in the country, they lose to Alabama and in turn drop 5 spots to number 6, and they missed the college football playoff. Why couldn't that happen again this year? Because the playoff committee said in this format, we will value the teams that get to that game. You look at Penn State, they have 2 losses, so does Ohio State. Ohio State has the head-to-head with them. But the one thing I said, the only way Penn State wins that argument is if the committee says there is no debate between Penn State and Ohio State for them to move up, because Penn State got that extra game. They were already ranked enough ahead of them that they didn't fall into that cluster, or they weren't compared side by side. So Penn State gets 6, Ohio State gets the 8, and SMU gets the 11 over Alabama because they were already ranked 8th, not penalized for winning, or not penalized for losing the ACC championship game by missing out on the playoff. So SMU is in, Alabama slides out because Clemson steals the spot from Alabama and gets that final playoff spot despite being ranked 16th here, because SMU, they fell 2 spots in the playoff committee's final rankings to number 10, sitting 1 spot ahead of Alabama, and that was the difference. It was 1 spot in the rankings, and that is why SMU is in the playoffs. And as you look toward the future, you heard Nick Saban and a couple of the other media guys talking about this. How do you schedule moving forward? Because I think there's going to be this influx of people saying, well, you shouldn't schedule big out of conference opponents. You shouldn't schedule these difficult games. You should just play the games on your schedule in your conference. And now that's difficult for the Big Ten, the SEC teams, because the conferences are so deep and they're so big now that you can't avoid every year playing a difficult schedule. Now, Oregon and Penn State and Texas were able to do such things. And, Penn State and Texas didn't perform well in the biggest games that they had this season. Alabama and Georgia, Ohio State, really difficult paths to get to where they had to go. Georgia ends up getting through it. Now they backdoored into the SEC championship game and they capitalized on the opportunity. And Georgia earned that win, beating Texas for the second time. It's hard to beat a team twice, and they did it. Beat them by 15 in Austin, and then again by 3 in Atlanta. So that's how that's going to shake out. And I think, too, with Alabama, we know they have great wins, but the losses that Alabama has, I think that was the difference in this one, because they were favored by 2 touchdowns against Oklahoma and they lost the game 24-3. You just can't do that late in the season and expect to be rewarded. You can't lose to Vanderbilt. You just can't do that. You can't lose. And I know Vanderbilt's a better team, but those are the things on your resume that you just cannot allow to happen. I know you have the big win against LSU. Your best losses is to Tennessee, who is a playoff team. But you know what? Losing to Vanderbilt by 5 and losing to Oklahoma by 21, those were probably the difference in that game because Alabama was not consistent throughout the whole year, whereas SMU was more consistent. Alabama played the more difficult schedule. They had the better strength of schedule. They had the better strength of record. But those losses hurt them. And you know what? Alabama only lost one of the quote unquote big games or difficult games or hard games on their schedule. The other 2 games they lost were games that they were big favorites in. They were supposed to win, double-digit favorites. And you dropped to Vanderbilt, you dropped to Oklahoma. It's not like you lost to LSU and Tennessee and Georgia, because if that was the case, sure, you wouldn't have any awesome wins on your resume. But at the same time, you could say, well, we lost to these really good teams, and maybe that would have been the difference because they didn't have that albatross like they did against Vanderbilt or against Oklahoma with landing that duck. But you can't lose 3 games and expect to have an argument to get in because you're a flawed team. And there's a lot of flawed teams when you're debating at that stage. I think we said before is, 4 teams, most years you had 2 or 3 that can win the championship. Occasionally you would have more than 4 teams that can win it. Like last year, I think Georgia could have won it. I think Ohio State could have been competitive. So you're looking about 5, 6 teams there last year. This year, I think, again, you're sitting there with 4 teams that can truly win it. And then I think you have 7 teams that could. So your 4 teams that I think you can guarantee that if they won the national championship, you wouldn't be surprised. And I think that is Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and Ohio State. And only one of those teams will be able to make the national championship game because they're all on the same side of the bracket. They will have to go through each other. Georgia standing alone on the other side with my other 2 teams that I would add to that list. We're sitting there with Notre Dame and Penn State just because of the path that they'd have to take to get to the national championship game. Tennessee being the other one. Again, I just don't know if they can get through that difficult of a schedule. Ohio State has the roster for it. Tennessee would need some help. So Penn State has an easy road to a semifinal. So does Georgia. They just got to beat Notre Dame. It's going to be – there's going to be changes to this format. I'm just going to let you know that there will be changes. But I really like the playoff bracket. I think they're going to be some fun games. I think that there's flaws. I think that it's ridiculous that Oregon gets penalized for winning the Big Ten by getting the toughest second round matchup in the quarterfinals of any team, getting to play Tennessee or Ohio State. So if you make the solution reseeding, or if you do away with the auto buys for the auto bid conference champions, I think that is the most likely scenario. What they need to do is if you win your conference, you just get an auto bid to the playoff. Doesn't mean you get a bye, just get an auto bid. Okay. Just like Clemson, they're out of the field in the rankings, but they won the ACC. They got the auto bid. So they're in at 12. That's how it should work for these teams. And then you see the tournament as they are ranked. And that's what it should be moving forward. So if that would be the case, you would have Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and Penn State having bye weeks. And then you would have the 5-12 still between Notre Dame and Clemson stealing that final spot. Then you would have the 6-11 game where it would be Ohio State, and I believe that will be SMU. Then you would have Tennessee and Indiana and Boise. It would be Ohio State and Arizona State. Then it would be Tennessee and Boise. And then you'd have Indiana sitting there as well. So they got to do something with the format, and I think that they will. But that's a story for another day. But very, very exciting college football playoff bracket. I think that this is going to be a phenomenal tournament. You're going to iron out the kinks. This is the first year of the system. This is good for 2 years. I think it will be changed. Maybe it gets changed for next year. I think that's fast. But by 2026, this will definitely look like a different tournament. I think all that will be ironed out, whether it stays at 12, goes to 14, whatever the case may be. They will fix this situation with the conference champions getting auto bids and auto buys in this. So that is our reaction to the college football playoff. The other bowl games going to be announced. We will come back later this week for more on these games. Again, phenomenal college football playoff. Opening round game against Ohio State and Tennessee is going to be something to watch. And then you can see everyone's got their opportunity. It's a clean slate. You got 2 weeks. Friday, December 20th, you get Notre Dame and Indiana. And then the other 3 games, Penn State, SMU, Clemson, Texas, and Ohio State, Tennessee, will be on Saturday, December 21st. So again, appreciate you listening to today's show. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned on our social media channels at Saturday Cadence and at Blake Biscardi. More content throughout the week. Tune into our website at tsilverbulletin.com. And remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. My name is Blake Biscardi. God bless, and we will see you next time.